Morning, everyone. And today I will be talking about diffusion models and the mathematical foundations, behind these powerful new class of generative models. Next, we'll take a look at two different papers that apply this class of models on video modality in basically an autoregressive setup. So that's what the talk is going to be about. And yeah, generally speaking, the task of all generative models is to attempt to estimate the data distribution given some observed samples, so that later on we can sample that distribution and generate our own new samples. Now, two major approaches that have been successful in the last couple of years are what is known as explicit likelihood methods, which include stuff like variational autoencoders or normalizing flows. And then, of course, generative adversarial networks, or GANs, as they are better known as, have also become quite popular in the recent years, and they belong to the other category, that is of implicit likelihood models. And now there's a lot of pros and cons that are associated with both explicit and implicit likelihood models. And so this slide is basically an attempt to give an appropriate taxonomy to these properties and to see where our aforementioned models lie based on the properties. Now what you see over here on the slide is referred to as the generative trilemma. There are certain properties that are related to high fidelity of the samples, the inference speed, and basically the diversity of the samples that are being generated. GANs are, typically known for their blazing fast inference speeds with, high fidelity realistic images. However, their adversarial training makes them pretty unstable, and oftentimes what we observe is mode collapse, where the samples, are just not diverse enough. Then on the other hand, we have some explicit likelihood-based approaches like that of VAEs and normalizing flows, and they have been shown to generate a full coverage of the true underlying distribution, resulting in better sample diversity. However, they are more prone to, blurry outputs. Later on in this talk, what we'll see is that diffusion models not only generate diverse samples, but also have excellent image fidelity, making them really popular in the recent years. However, they do suffer from slow sampling speeds. And of course, the holy grail of deep generative modeling is to aim for a model for which all these three properties can simultaneously hold true. And if recent progress is any kind of an indicator, we are inching closer and closer towards realizing that goal. With that being said, I'll present a brief overview of diffusion models in general before we dive deeper into the mathematical foundation of it all. Originally, they were introduced all the way back in 2015 by Soldeck's team, and it only gained prominence in the recent years in like 2020 and 2021 when Jonathan Ho released the famous DDPM paper, and along with it, a couple of tips and tricks which basically made high fidelity image generation really possible. A short summary of how diffusion models work is that it's basically a denoising method, where you start out from pure noise and then you denoise that noise step by step. And this is done in an iterative fashion. And later on, we'll be seeing that it is equivalent to sampling from an underlying learned distribution about the data. So yeah, now this model was basically developed for generating images. So most of this talk will develop the ideas based on that. However, you all do need to keep in mind that it easily applies to any other modality of data as well, be it videos, be it audio, or be it any one-dimensional time series or anything like that. So starting out, I'll give a brief idea of what the notations are and what they refer to. Let me just quickly switch to the laser pointer so that things are easier. Yeah. So first let's talk about the data, or the observed samples, or the images that we already have, which is going to be referred to as x sub 0. Now, what we're going to do is that we have a noise adding process that is Markovian in nature, and that gradually corrupts the actual image and destroys its structure incrementally by adding a small amount of Gaussian noise at each step, until it converges to a pure Gaussian noise after, capital T steps. So x sub capital T over here is the final Gaussian noise that we get after the noise adding process has been, finished up until a specified number of steps. So what we have here is a forward process where we start out from x sub 0 and we converge up until x sub t. And all the intermediate variables that we see from x sub 1 to x sub t minus 1 are the intermediate latent variables. So essentially what we have over here is a class of models that is a latent variable model class. Now, how I mentioned, how I mentioned that the process over here is Markovian, which implies that for our latent variable model over here, the modeling assumption is that x sub t only depends on x sub t minus 1. Now, this Markovian assumption that we had helps us break this overall conditional join distribution down to its independent pairwise components, right? So each component, Q of x sub t given x sub t minus 1, basically represents a transition distribution in the forward process where you go from step t minus 1 to step t. And it is basically a fixed Gaussian distribution whose parameters basically depend on the steps. So it is pretty trivial to sample from that Gaussian distribution. And given a variance schedule and a starting image, what you can do is you can iteratively sample from these transition distributions to reach at any diffusion step t. So for example, if I have the starting original image, let's say at x0, then if I want to reach at the noisy version of that image at step number 50, let's say, so we can start from Q of x2 given x1 and then Q of x3 given x2, and you can, iteratively sample from these transition distributions and finally reach at x sub 50, right? Now note that the variance schedule that you see over here, that is beta t, that is basically an increasing variance schedule, which means that more diffusion steps you take, the more noise gets added at each step. Now, there's also a neat little mathematical trick, since everything is Gaussian over here, like all these transition distributions are Gaussian. So essentially, that allows us to calculate x sub t given x sub 0, which basically means that you can sample xt at any arbitrary time step. You don't really need to, go sequentially from one image to the other to finally reach an arbitrarily noised image. You can directly get there from x sub 0 using this particular transitional distribution. Yeah, and that's that. So basically, this allows for a fast sampling of any arbitrary latent variable instead of obtaining it sequentially, and that is usually helpful when we are actually training the model. Moving on, the next thing is the reverse process. And in the reverse process, what we are going to do is the exact opposite of the forward process. Here, we are going from pure Gaussian noise to x sub 0, which is our actual image. And we again imply a Markovian assumption over here as, that is why the resulting transition distribution is something which is basically learned, whose parameters are basically learned. So based on these learned transition distributions, we can basically feed any x sub t and get back x sub t minus 1. And if we repeat this process iteratively starting from, let's say, pure Gaussian noise, we can reach back to our actual image. So this is the reverse process. And the only thing that you need to notice over here is that the parameters of the distribution of this reverse process is what the diffusion model learns. So the parameters over here, the mean and the variance of the Gaussian distribution is something that is parameterized by a neural network. Now, what is the training objective of this neural network? How is this neural network basically trained? It is trained using a maximum likelihood setup. So basically what we want to do is that we want to maximize the likelihood of the training data. And by maximizing the likelihood of the training data, we mean that the observed data samples that we have over here, that is x sub 0, we want to maximize the probability associated by the neural networks for x sub 0. And that essentially means minimizing the negative log likelihood. However, as you would notice, since it is a latent variable model, we can only get the likelihood by marginalizing out all the inherent latent variables. And this process of marginalization is basically intractable because it is spanning all possible combinations over all possible latent variables, right? So doing this kind of a transition is very intractable. So we need certain different kinds of methods. And this problem is reminiscent to other latent variable models like the VAEs that if you might have heard of it before, right? So this slide is just like for those people who are familiar with VAEs, like it's a neat little comparison between how VAEs can be similar to diffusion models in this setup. So these are the different graphical models for different kinds of variation autoencoders. So like in a variation autoencoder setup where you actually have your latent variables, there is a forward process where you actually learn the latent variables given the data. And once you have finished the training process, then you can actually sample from the latent variable and get back your data, right? So that is your typical variation autoencoder. In a hierarchical setup, you have multiple levels of such latent variables, right? So you are going to Z1 given X, then you're going to Z2 given Z1. And then there's a reverse process where you kind of try to infer the actual image based on these hidden two-level hidden hierarchical latent variables. Now, the only difference with diffusion models over here is that the forward process is kind of fixed. It's not really learned. So here, as you can see, there is Q sub phi over here, right? Where phi is a parameter for these learned distributions. But here, the forward process is kind of fixed by a Gaussian distribution that we know of beforehand. It's only the reverse process that's actually learned by us. And that is what a diffusion model really is. But yeah, moving on. Usually the trick that is used to deal with the intractable evidence is a trick called elbow, which is commonly seen in Bayesian inference. And the whole idea is, if you really want to skip the math, is that the evidence over here can be upper bounded by some different kind of a quantity, right? And instead of minimizing this quantity, we are now going to be minimizing this quantity instead. So it's just like a simple application of Jensen's inequality, and going from here to here is a very simple extension of that inequality. However, what we see next is through some really complicated math, we can basically reduce this particular term down to multiple terms. Now we'll go through each term one by one. So there is an L0, which has got this form. Then L1 to LT minus 1 all have forms like this, where DKL basically means the Kullback-Leibler divergence between two particular distributions. And then we have a final LT, which looks something like this. So what you can see over here is that our objective really is a sum of different distribution matching terms. And next, we'll basically analyze what these different distribution matching terms are. So what you see over here is that P theta of xt minus 1 given xt is what our diffusion model really is, which is defined by the parameters of the neural network mu theta and sigma theta, as you saw over here, right? So this is what that term is. And then we have this mysterious term over here, which is q of xt minus 1 given xt and x0. Now this term over here can basically be obtained using Bayes' rule. And then there is some further math that is involved in kind of simplifying this term. And what we basically get is that it is, again, a complicated Gaussian distribution, but it is a Gaussian distribution nonetheless. And as we all know, that the Kullback-Leibler divergence between any two Gaussian distributions has a closed analytical form. So regarding the training objective that we saw before, LT has two distributions which are both Gaussian, and therefore it has a closed analytical form. L sub small t is also a Kullback-Leibler divergence between two distributions, both of which we saw previously are Gaussians. So again, this also has a closed analytical form. And usually while modeling this, it has been empirically seen that if you kind of ignore the L0 term, it works as well. And again, LT term is independent of theta, so you don't really need to model. So what is left is for us to really consider this term from L1 to LT minus 1, which is basically the KL divergence between the two quantities that we saw earlier. Now there are some broader range assumptions that we again see. What we observe is that beta t, the variance schedule, which is defined for the forward process where you actually add the noise, the variance for that noise is basically fixed and given by us beforehand. And the other assumption that we make, and which is empirically seen to perform better, there's no really a strong reason behind this, is that the sigma theta parameter over here need not be learned. It can simply be fixed and it still performs okay. So yeah, and that is usually replaced by sigma square t over here, which can be replaced by beta t again and performs perfectly fine. So yeah, this is the only KL divergence term which matters in our training objective, which can be broken down into something like this. Where the parameter mu tilde t is something that we got from here. And when you do further reparameterization, you can actually, the quantity of interest that needs to be minimized is this. So essentially what our model becomes is something that tries to estimate the noise at any given randomly sampled noisy intermediate latent variable xt. So long story short, if you really want to have a bird's eye view of how the model gets trained and how we can sample from it, what you really need to do is sample an arbitrary diffusion step, let's say x sub t, figure out what the noisy version of your image is at that particular point, that is x sub t, and x sub t can basically be calculated using the reparameterization trick as this. Feed that noisy image along with the diffusion step into the neural network epsilon theta to get a prediction for what the noise is in that particular image, and basically perform gradient descent. That's all there is to this. And you need to do this up until convergence. Once that is converged, what we basically have with us is a neural network that can practically predict the amount of noise at any particular noisy version of that image with ease. And using that neural network, you can then iteratively remove the noise from a pure Gaussian noise and get back your actual image in the sampling procedure. So that's all there is to the forward and the reverse process as shown in algorithm 1 and algorithm 2. But yeah, before we proceed, let me know if you guys have any other questions about this process. And yeah. Yeah, okay, so if not, then yeah, we can move on to the fun part where we try to see how they're, being applied to different kinds of data modalities and what kind of different architecture choices are being used these days to make them work for, slightly more complicated tasks and methods. So today I will be talking about video diffusion models particularly, and more specifically, it's about the two papers that we did in our lab. One paper was on video prediction methods, and the other was on video super resolution method. And both of them use an autoregressive setup and use diffusion models as well. So first, I will be talking about the video prediction problem, and then I will be talking about the video super resolution problem. So the video prediction problem basically is that given a video which has quite a number of frames, what if you have, let's say, a couple of frames given to you initially as context, and based on those couple of frames given to you as context, can you predict the future frames? So that is basically the problem setup. And given that problem setup, how can we use diffusion models for the same? So as you can see over here, the general idea is that we use over here is that of residual modeling. Now, residual modeling is a very common approach that has been used, in compression techniques, in video compression problems, where what you do is that you come up with a mean prediction for what your next frame would be given your current frame. And then you correct that mean prediction with some residuals to make that image much more crisper and much more sharper. And that is what residual modeling is all about. It is basically inspired from predictive coding. And yeah, how it is applied over here is, if you look at the overview figure, let's say we have with us the past 3 frames, xt minus 3, xt minus 2, and xt minus 1. And we are interested in predicting x sub t. Now, how do we do that? We first, use a neural network to come up with a mean prediction, let's say mu of t. And we use a diffusion model that has been conditioned on these past frames to come up with a residual that is y of t. And then we add this residual on top of the mean prediction that we already had from a deterministic model to come up with the actual frame x of t. Now, this x of t can again be fed into the buffer, and we can calculate xt plus 1, then xt plus 2, so on and so forth. And that is why this approach is, autoregressive, because each frame is being predicted one by one. If you really want to have a more detailed view through the graphical model, what's happening over here is that given the past frames as context, we come up with mu of t. This mu of t is then subtracted from the ground truth x of t to come up with a residual. This residual is then used as training data for training our diffusion model in the training process, as you saw in the algorithm 1. Finally, when we are trying to denoise, we take in the context from the previous frames, and we use that context to denoise and come up with a residual. This residual is then added on top of the mean prediction that we already had to come up with the actual prediction for the next frame. And that is how the autoregressive video prediction method using diffusion models actually works. And just hold on a second. Yeah. So again, if we really want to make a fair comparison with the algorithms that we saw before, the algorithms will remain exactly the same. Only here we first calculate the residual based on some deterministic network that generates the mean prediction. Once we have that mean prediction, we subtract it from our data. We have a residual. We generate a noisy version of that residual, and then we feed our diffusion model based on these residuals, right? And we have our training completed, and when we have to sample, we basically do the same thing again. We basically use our trained diffusion model to come up with a residual. And once that residual is obtained with us, then we can add that residual to the deterministic prediction and generate our sample at any given time point that we want to. So this is what the whole training and sampling process looks like for a video. And then, of course, this is the slide where we discuss our results. So these are the ground truth frames. So every column basically is comparing different kinds of methods. So the first column is the ground truth at different kinds of time instance. So these are the video different frames. The second column is the result from our method. The third and fourth columns are some strong VAE baselines, and the last couple of columns are strong GAN baselines. And as you can see, there is not a lot of blurring that's happening even at further time instance. So I'm sorry, I see a question by Jatan.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, if whenever is a good time for you, I
Yeah,
can
no,
ask the
go ahead.
question.
It's good. You're
Okay.
good.
No, these results are great. I have two questions now. So
Yeah,
one
sure. Go
is
ahead.
how do you generate the mu, which is the deterministic? So is that like
Yeah,
some
so basically we use a convolutional LSTM to
Mhm.
generate that. So it's a deterministic prediction using convolutional LSTMs where you just feed in the context frames and you come up with a blurry prediction of what the current frame should look like. And then you correct for those blurry current frame predictions by the residual that you get from your diffusion model that has already been conditioned on the context frames.
Right. I mean, this is the part that is tripping me because in some sense, before in the pre-diffusion model era, people would just do the conval STM for video training, right? Like
Yeah,
that was the norm. And so
yeah.
so now it seems, I mean, just if you had to explain intuitively, like what the diffusion model context training is doing, it's adding some information clearly. But why does it do better than just the classic conval STM or even the VAE-based
Okay,
video
yeah,
methods?
sure. So the problem with most deterministic prediction-based models is that uh, the whole problem of video prediction is a multimodal problem because given, let's say, given a context frame, you
Mhm.
can have multiple diverging possible paths of what the future frames could look like. And deterministic prediction models account for that by averaging all of these different possibilities and creating a blurry output.
Right.
So inherently any kind of a deterministic model in terms of any kind of evaluation metric, be it PSNR or anything else, will always result in something that is a blurry prediction. It will never have a crisp uh, 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 output. And to get those details, to get those rich structures which are present in the frames, what you do need to do is perform some sort of a residual modeling because instead of predicting whole frames as such, if you can only predict the residues, that residue has actually much more richer information that can add to a lot more context, that can add to a lot more structure. And that is the reason why if you try to split these two different procedures, you get better results than instead of trying to do everything together using one model. And we have actually done an ablation study that shows that doing this is better. So yeah, there is an
Yeah.
empirical evidence for that as well.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, this is very helpful. So I mean, maybe so can I think of this as saying, well, I need to know the mean state, but I also know I need to know the first derivative. Like I need to know like the rate of change. So the diffusion model is giving me the rate of change scaled by some normalization
Yeah.
plus the mean state. And then in that case, you can just, are you assuming that the second derivative doesn't matter? Like, I mean, I'm wondering, like, where does this approximation break down? Or maybe that's something in more in the discussion section. Um, like, does it break down after 20 time steps? Does it break down
Yeah, I mean,
after,
at the end of the day, it is an autoregressive model.
okay.
So as you keep on adding the predictions into the buffer,
Mhm.
since the predictions are not, picture perfect. So gradually these noisy instances start to add up. And I think up until 25 frames, it remains quite good. But like after 25 frames, it starts to break and becomes blurrier again. But then again, for those 25 frames, it's still state of the art. Yeah.
Sounds great. Thank you again.
Yeah. No worries. So yeah, if anybody has any more questions, I'm open to answering those. So yeah, feel free to interrupt me. Um, So yeah, this is what a visual comparison of our model against these different kinds of models looks like. And yeah, we basically compared it against, some perceptual metrics like FVD and LPIPs, and also against some traditional forecasting metrics that actually measure the stochasticity of our method and, actually check whether the stochasticity that our method introduces makes sense or not. And as you can see across board for the different kinds of data sets that we had, our method actually kind of performs really well for all of these different metrics. And in the second table that you can see over here, it's basically an ablation study, and VD versus RVD is what I was talking with Jitan earlier, where one is residual based and the other is non-residual based. So in the non-residual setup, we just do away with the deterministic predictions and only work on full frame prediction through the diffusion model. And that does not work as good as the residual modeling does. So residual modeling does play a vital role, you know, in making our predictions better. Yeah, so there's that. And finally, how we have also applied this model for video super resolution is what I'll be discussing it now. Again, the method is very similar as from what you saw before. It is an autoregressive setup, but we don't really need long-term context, you know. So just to introduce the task for those of you who are unfamiliar, super resolution basically involves given a low resolution frame input, can we make it you know, into a high resolution frame, like going from images that can scale by a factor of 4 or 8, you know, and making those videos much more enlarged and preserving and introducing interesting structures without, you know, making any kind of blurry output. So that is the overall setup. And over here, we can see that, again, the overall process looks very similar, but since we already have access to low resolution frames at that particular time instant, we don't really need long-term context. Again, what we can work with is optical flow instead. So what we do over here is that given so X represents the low resolution input and Y represents the high resolution input. So given past two high resolution inputs and the current low resolution input, what we try to predict is an optical flow. And once we have that optical flow with us, we do some sort of a warping method. We apply some sort of warping so that we have, you know, some warped high resolution full scale prediction with us. And that high resolution full scale warp prediction with us is then, you know, made much more crisper with residues that are modeled using a diffusion model. And then again, this is a graphical model for the same, which shows the exact flow of information across the whole channel. And what we see next is it basically results in much more crisper videos. So as you can see over here, we have we have ground truth high resolution images, videos with us. And what we have is a ground truth low resolution video that you see over here. When you perform some sort of flow warping, what you're essentially doing is that you are trying to predict what the next high resolution frame could look like. And in regions where there is less motion, there is higher certainty of what those pixels would be. And that is why those areas are not blurry. But for example, the car, you know, for example, that is moving at a higher speed. What we see over here is that the position of that car is quite uncertain by that flow prediction model. And that is why it is quite blurry. And we are making that prediction much more crisper by adding a residual by our diffusion model, which results in a much more clearer high resolution picture with us. So yeah, that is what video super resolution looks like in an autoregressive setup, which, you know, uses residual modeling and diffusion as well. So yeah, that was all that my talk was about. Hope you guys, you know, learned something interesting about what is the current state of the art for diffusion models. And yeah, I'm open to questions. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you. That was a really interesting presentation.
Thanks, Kara. Yeah, Jitan. Oh.
No, it was a great presentation.
Okay. Yeah.
I guess I have a question. Like, have you seen like interesting applications of like these types of models to like physical systems? I mean, I guess these are physical systems, but maybe like physical science problems in particular.
No, definitely. We have also actually been working on, applying generative diffusion models in climate science domain as well. And there has been a lot of interesting work that's been going on in climate forecasting models. Also, in setups where you really have, you really work with low resolution climate forecasting and then try to, go on to high resolution methods. And in those domains, we are seeing interesting and good results as well. So yeah, there's definitely, that's a lot of work that's been going on in natural science domain as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, may I ask, like, what's the number of layers for your training? Like, how many levels of Gaussian process noises do you need to add in like a
So
general...
typically, it's of the order of 1,000 to 2,000 diffusion steps.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Which is why the sampling process makes the whole diffusion models quite slow, because you have to go back 2,000 steps, right, to make the inference. And that is why, again, as I showed in the generative trilemma setup, where they are known to produce crisp samples, they are known to produce diverse samples, but what they are not good at is sampling speeds. Although a lot of interesting research is going on these days, which actually tries to alleviate that problem. An interesting paper that I can direct you towards is the DDIM sampling method, which actually reduces the number of time steps required drastically. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting research direction that goes on into making inference much more faster for diffusion models. Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, I wanted to say very cool work, and I have like a simple question. Do you need a lot of data to train your model? Like, what is the minimum amount of samples that you need to have?
Sure. Yeah, it is a data hungry process, a data hungry model, but as most deep learning models are, I would say. So yeah, at least for video diffusion models, they do need a significant amount of data and compute as well. I would say for video models, we had like, tens of thousands of videos, which also had a lot of frames within them. So you can imagine that into number of frames as many images. So yeah, it is usually a data hungry process, but for most of the natural science domain based problems, what we usually see is that sometimes different simulation based data can also be used as a proxy, right? So that has also been seen to be done to make that as some sort of a pre-training, and then you can actually use your actual data, to fine tune your model. So yeah, hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you.
I have another question that's kind of general. So it's like, I wonder, with this method, do people talk about the difference between interpolation and extrapolation? Or like when it comes to extrapolation, what's kind of the maximum extent that is still reliable? Like, it's not like, just generally, do people think about that? Thanks.
Yeah, people do. And then there are also, something that is called zero shot inference, where you have trained on one particular kind of a task and you want to make it work on a different kind of a task. So there are different degrees of extrapolation, right? Like there could be a problem where tasks differ. There could be a problem where overall data distribution shifts on its own. So depending on the severity of the distribution shift that's happening, obviously the degradation in performance would be expected. But the kind of research that happens usually revolves around in distribution testing data, so that's not usually a concern. But of course, there has been work that has been done on, trying to see whether they are robust in out of distribution setups. So there is definitely work going on that as well. I'm not much aware about the nitty-gritties of it, but I do know that it is being worked upon. Yeah.
Thanks, because I think it seems like it's possible it actually learns some physics. So maybe even with extrapolation, it could work pretty well at some extent. Yeah, thanks.
There are many research groups that actually are working on learning physics using a combination of diffusion models and symbolic reasoning. So yeah, a lot of interesting work that is going on these days in this field. Yeah, for sure.
Would you like potentially share some links or to papers on that?
Yeah, sure. I will. Maybe I can share it to you later on, and then.
Okay, sure. That'd be awesome.
Prakhar, can I ask another question related to this question of generalization? So typically, I mean, when it comes to applying this to physical data, like a good question that referees ask, or just in general, the community cares about is interpretability. And I know you mentioned that, this is not necessarily related to the video work, but also like could be. But in your experience with climate data, how would you answer the interpretability question, right? Like, so I mean, is there a layer-wise relevance propagation analog for diffusion models, or something to that end? And so yeah, how are you dealing with that?
Sure. So there are different notions of interpretability, right? Like at the end of the day, this is a latent variable model, right? So interpretability as such is not does not come with it. There are ways that you can access how the model is coming up with a particular output based on the kind of measures that you apply on top of it. And there are different levels of interpretability. For example, over here, you can, judge why a particular feature was to be resolved in a particular manner based on the kind of flow maps that it was generating, right? So for some people, observing that flow map would be enough to figure out what's wrong with the model or what's right with it. But if you really want to actually dive deep into the details and see for yourself, like how these underlying latent variables that are noisy in structure can relate to that, that's not really possible. But then again, there are many results based on computer vision that actually work on gradient-based methods of interpretability, that actually can point out regions in the input image that can relate your output to your input. Those methods have not been extensively studied as of now, but I'm sure there has been work done. I'm just not up to date on the interpretability stuff as well, but as much as I would like to. But I'm sure the existing methods that have been used in computer vision beforehand can be applied and extended on top of this. Yeah.
Right. But like, say for instance, no, I think that's a great answer. I'm just wondering if, like, say I use diffusion models to generate like really high quality temperature forecasts, downscale temperature forecasts. Like, given that I'm adding some stochastic noise, maybe temperature might even be fine, but like, things like precipitation and so on. It's just saying that, yeah, you can impose a structure, a noise structure, but you don't really know, like, at the end of the day, like.
Yeah, I totally get it. And that is a problem, I think, with neural networks at large, that they fail silently. Like the whole idea, that they don't fail with a bang. Like you really need to know that when distribution shift inherently occurs in your testing data, that your method really cannot be relied on. And then there has been a lot of research done where, for example, I'll tell you of an instance where on a different project that I was working on, where we were also, trying to output the amount of uncertainty associated with the prediction that a neural network was making. And that uncertainty was then calibrated to make sure that it also works as an anomaly detector, so that whenever some kind of distribution shift occurs, we can actually be sure that we cannot really trust the predictions that the neural network is making. So methods like that do exist in adjacent areas of deep learning. Whether they can be extended trivially into diffusion models, I'm not very sure at the moment, but something along those lines could definitely be thought of for sure.
Right. I mean, one thing to be done would be to just, extend it beyond the Gaussian case, just to see if there's any I know that it's sort of
people have done interesting research about non-Gaussian noises. There's a paper on soft diffusion that actually talks about it. I can forward you the link. But yeah, I can see your chain of thought as to what you were trying to refer to. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm creating a diffusion chain here, right here. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I guess I feel like diffusion models are a super popular topic right now. Do you have an idea of what might be the next popular model that takes off in or is that just not possible to anticipate at this point?
It's really difficult to anticipate for sure, because even for diffusion models, we have not even explored, a lot of it to begin with. Every other month, we come across, different papers that actually make sampling better, or make fidelity better, or make all different kinds of things better with them. So I don't think that they have been fully exhausted yet for us to begin worrying about what's the next big class of models. But then again, inspiration can come from anywhere. For example, even for diffusion models, I think the foundation about how the diffusion process works and how Langevin dynamics from molecular systems can be used to sample better models was something that always existed in physics and was known to people who work with thermodynamics. So it's a matter of just going back and coming up with some things that was not applied or not thought of before into this field. So yeah.
Yeah. Did anybody else have any other questions? Because otherwise we'd probably finish a few minutes early. Yeah, so thanks again for speaking with us today. In 2 weeks, we'll have Peter Jan van Leuven talking. It's going to be at a different time. I think it'll be at 3:30, sort of the typical seminar time instead, just because he had to teach. But I'll add some more information about that on the Slack channel. Anyway, so thanks again for coming and for speaking to us.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kara.
Yeah.